Did Smerdis have thee to his presence, and give thee thy orders, or hadst thou them from one of his officers? The herald answered, Truly, I have not set eyes on Smerdis, son of Cyrus, since the day when King Cambyses led the Persians into Egypt. The man who gave me my orders was the Magus that Cambyses left in charge of the household. But he said that Smerdis, son of Cyrus, sent you the message. In all this the herald spoke nothing but the strict truth. Then Cambyses said thus to Prexaspes, Thou art free from all blame, Prexaspes, since, as a right good man, thou hast not failed to do the thing which I commanded. But tell me now, which of the Persians can have taken the name of Smerdis and revolted from me? I think, my liege, he answered, that I apprehend the whole business. The men who have risen in revolt against thee are the two magi, Patisithes, who was left controller of thy household, and his brother, who is named Smerdis. Cambyses no sooner heard the name of Smerdis than he was struck with the truth of Prexaspes' words, and the fulfilment of his own dream, the dream, I mean, which he had in former days, when one appeared to him in his sleep, and told him that Smerdis sate upon the royal throne, and with his head touched the heavens. So when he saw that he had needlessly slain his brother Smerdis, he wept and bewailed his loss, after which, smarting with vexation as he thought of all his ill luck, he sprang hastily upon his steed, meaning to march his army with all haste to Susa against the Magus. As he made his spring, the button of his sword sheath fell off, and the bared point entered his thigh, wounding him exactly where he had himself once wounded the Egyptian god Apis. Then Cambyses, feeling that he had got his death wound, inquired the name of the place where he was, and was answered Ecbatana. Now before this it had been told him by the oracle at Buto that he should end his days at Ecbatana. He, however, had understood the Median Ecbatana, where all his treasures were, and had thought that he should die there in good old age. But the oracle meant Ecbatana in Syria. So when Cambyses heard the name of the place, the double shock that he had received from the revolt of the Magus and from his wound brought him back to his senses. And he understood now the true meaning of the oracle, and said, Here then Cambyses, son of Cyrus, is doomed to die. At this time he said no more, but 20 days afterwards he called to his presence all the chief Persians who were with the army, and addressed them as follows. Persians, needs must I tell you now, what hitherto I have striven with the greatest care to keep concealed. When I was in Egypt I saw in my sleep a vision, which would that I had never beheld. I thought a messenger came to me from my home, and told me that Smerdis sate upon the royal throne, and with his head touched the heavens. Then I feared to be cast from my throne by Smerdis, my brother, and I did what was more hasty than wise. Ah, truly, do what they may, it is impossible for men to turn aside the coming fate. I, in my folly, sent Prexaspes to Susa to put my brother to death. So this great woe was accomplished, and I then lived without fear, never imagining that after Smerdis was dead I need dread revolt from any other. But herein I had quite mistaken what was about to happen, and so I slew my brother without any need, and nevertheless have lost my crown. For it was Smerdis the Magus, and not Smerdis my brother, of whose rebellion God forewarned me by the vision. The deed is done, however, and Smerdis, son of Cyrus, be sure is lost to you. The Magi have the royal power, Patisithes, whom I left at Susa to overlook my household, and Smerdis his brother. There was one who would have been bound beyond all others to avenge the wrongs I have suffered from these Magians, but he, alas, has perished by a horrid fate, deprived of life by those nearest and dearest to him. In his default, nothing now remains for me but to tell you, O Persians, what I would wish to have done after I have breathed my last. Therefore, in the name of the gods that watch over our royal house, I charge you all, and especially such of you as are Achaemenids, that ye do not tamely allow the kingdom to go back to the Medes. Recover it one way or another, by force or fraud. By fraud, if it's by fraud that they have seized on it. By force, if force has helped them in their enterprise. Do this, and then may your land bring you forth fruit abundantly, and your wives bear children, and your herds increase, and freedom be your portion forever. But do it not, make no brave struggle to regain the kingdom, and then my curse be on you, and may the opposite of all these things happen to you, and not only so, but may you one and all perish at the last by such a fate as mine." Then Cambyses, when he left speaking, bewailed his whole misfortune from beginning to end. Whereupon the Persians, seeing their king weep, rent the garments that they had on, and uttered lamentable cries. After which, as the bone presently grew carious, and the limb gangrened, Cambyses, son of Cyrus, died. He had reigned in all 7 years and 5 months, and left no issue behind him, male or female. The Persians, who had heard his words, put no faith in anything that he said concerning the Magi having the royal power, but believed that he spoke out of hatred towards Smerdis, and had invented the tale of his death to cause the whole Persian race to rise up in arms against him. Thus they were convinced that it was Smerdis the son of Cyrus who had rebelled and now sate on the throne. For Prexaspes stoutly denied that he had slain Smerdis, since it was not safe for him, after Cambyses was dead, to allow that a son of Cyrus had met with death at his hands. Thus then Cambyses died, and the Magus now reigned in security, and passed himself off for Smerdis the son of Cyrus. And so went by the 7 months which were wanting to complete the 8th year of Cambyses. His subjects, while his reign lasted, received great benefits from him, insomuch that when he died all the dwellers in Asia mourned his loss exceedingly, except only the Persians. For no sooner did he come to the throne than forthwith he sent round to every nation under his rule, and granted them freedom from war service and from taxes for the space of 3 years. In the 8th month, however, it was discovered who he was in the mode following. There was a man called Otanes, the son of Pharnaspes, who for rank and wealth was equal to the greatest of the Persians. This Otanes was the first to suspect that the Magus was not Smerdis, the son of Cyrus, and to surmise, moreover, who he really was. He was led to guess the truth by the king never quitting the citadel, and never calling before him any of the Persian noblemen. As soon, therefore, as his suspicions were aroused, he adopted the following measures. One of his daughters, who was called Phidima, had been married to Cambyses, and was taken to wife, together with the rest of Cambyses's wives, by the Magus. To this daughter Otanes sent a message, and inquired of her who it was whose bed she shared. Was it Smerdis the son of Cyrus, or was it some other man? Phidima in reply declared she did not know. Smerdis the son of Cyrus she had never seen, and so she could not tell whose bed she shared. Upon this Otanes sent a second time, and said, If thou dost not know Smerdis son of Cyrus thyself, ask Queen Atossa who it is with whom ye both live. She cannot fail to know her own brother. To this the daughter made answer, I can neither get speech with Atossa, nor with any of the women who lodge in the palace. For no sooner did this man, be he who he may, obtain the kingdom, than he parted us from one another, and gave us all separate chambers. This made the matter seem still more plain to Otanes, Nevertheless he sent a third message to his daughter in these words following: Daughter, thou art of noble blood. Thou wilt not shrink from a risk which thy father bids thee encounter. If this fellow be not Smerdis, the son of Cyrus, but the man whom I think him to be, his boldness in taking thee to be his wife and lording it over the Persians must not be allowed to pass unpunished. Now therefore do as I command. When next he passes the night with thee, wait till thou art sure he is fast asleep, and then feel for his ears. If thou findest him to have ears, then believe him to be Smerdis the son of Cyrus. But if he has none, know him for Smerdis the Magian. Phidima returned for answer, It would be a great risk if he was without ears, and caught her feeling for them. She well knew he would make away with her. Nevertheless she would venture. So Atanes got his daughter's promise that she would do as he desired. Now Smerdis the Magian had had his ears cut off in the lifetime of Cyrus, son of Cambyses, as a punishment for a crime of no slight heinousness. Phidima, therefore, Otanes' daughter, bent on accomplishing what she had promised her father, when her turn came, and she was taken to the bed of the Magus. In Persia a man's wives sleep with him in their turns, waited till he was sound asleep, and then felt for his ears. She quickly perceived that he had no ears, and of this, as soon as day dawned, she sent word to her father. Then Otanes took to him two of the chief Persians, Aspathenes and Gobryas, men whom it was most advisable to trust in such a matter, and told them everything. Now they had already of themselves suspected how the matter stood. When Otanes therefore laid his reasons before them, they at once came into his views, and it was agreed that each of the three should take as companion in the work the Persian in whom he placed the greatest confidence. Then Otanes chose Interfernes, Gobryas Megabyzus, and Aspathenes Hydarnes. After the number had thus become 6, Darius, the son of Hystaspes, arrived at Susa from Persia, whereof his father was governor. On his coming it seemed good to the 6 to take him likewise into their councils. After this, the men, being now 7 in all, met together to exchange oaths and hold discourse with one another. And when it came to the turn of Darius to speak his mind, he said as follows: Methought no one but I knew that Smerdis, the son of Cyrus, was not now alive, and that Smerdis the Magian ruled over us. On this account I came hither with speed to compass the death of the Magian. But as it seems the matter is known to you all, and not to me only, my judgment is that we should act at once, and not any longer delay, for to do so were not well. Otanes spoke upon this. Son of Hystaspes, said he, thou art the child of a brave father, and seemest likely to show thyself as bold a gallant as he. Beware, however, of rash haste in this matter. Do not hurry so, but proceed with soberness. We must add to our number ere we adventure to strike the blow. Not so, Darius rejoined, for let all present be well assured that if the advice of Otanes guide our acts, we shall perish most miserably. Some one will betray our plot to the Magians for lucre's sake. Ye ought to have kept the matter to yourselves, and so made the venture, but as ye have chosen to take others into your secret, and have opened the matter to me, take my advice, and make the attempt today, or if not, if a single day be suffered to pass by, be sure that I will let no one betray me to the Magian. I myself will go to him, and plainly denounce you all. Otanes, when he saw Darius so hot, replied, If thou wilt force us to action, and not allow a day's delay, tell us, I pray thee, how we shall get entrance into the palace, so as to set upon them. Guards are placed everywhere, as thou thyself well knowest. For if thou hast not seen, at least thou hast heard tell of them. How are we to pass these guards, I ask thee? Otanes answered Darius, "There are many things easy enough in act, which by speech it is hard to explain. There are also things concerning which speech is easy, but no noble action follows when the speech is done. As for these guards, ye know well that we shall not find it hard to make our way through them. Our rank alone would cause them to allow us to enter, shame and fear alike forbidding them to say us nay. But besides, I have the fairest plea that can be conceived for gaining admission. I can say that I have just come from Persia, and have a message to deliver to the king from my father. An untruth must be spoken where need requires, for whether men lie or say true, it is with one and the same object. Men lie because they think to gain by deceiving others, and speak the truth because they expect to get something by their true speaking, and to be trusted afterwards in more important matters. Thus, though their conduct is so opposite, the end of both is alike. If there were no gain to be got, your true-speaking man would tell untruths as much as your liar, and your liar would tell the truth as much as your true-speaking man. The doorkeeper who lets us in readily shall have his guerdon some day or other, but woe to the man who resists us. He must forthwith be declared an enemy. Forcing our way past him, we will press in and go straight to our work." After Darius had thus said, Gobryas spoke as follows. "Dear friends, when will a fitter occasion offer for us to recover the kingdom, or, if we're not strong enough, at least die in the attempt? Consider that we Persians are governed by a Median magus, and one, too, who has had his ears cut off. Some of you were present when Cambyses lay upon his deathbed. Such doubtless remember what curses he called down upon the Persians if they made no effort to recover the kingdom. Then indeed we paid but little heed to what he said, because we thought he spoke out of hatred to set us against his brother. Now, however, my vote is that we do as Darius has counselled, march straight in a body to the palace from the place where we now are, and forthwith set upon the Magian." So Gobryas spake, and the others all approved. While the seven were thus taking counsel together, it so chanced that the following events were happening. The Magi had been thinking what they had best do, and had resolved for many reasons to make a friend of Prexaspes. They knew how cruelly he had been outraged by Cambyses, who slew his son with an arrow. They were also aware that it was by his hand that Smerdis, the son of Cyrus, fell, and that he was the only person privy to that prince's death. And they further found him to be held in the highest esteem by all the Persians. So they called him to them, made him their friend, and bowed him by a promise and by oaths to keep silence about the fraud which they were practising upon the Persians, and not discover it to anyone. And they pledged themselves that in this case they would give him thousands of gifts of every sort and kind. So Prexaspes agreed, and the Magi, when they found that they had persuaded him so far, went on to another proposal, and said they would assemble the Persians at the foot of the palace wall, and he should mount one of the towers and harangue them from it, assuring them that Smerdis, the son of Cyrus, and none but he, ruled the land. This they bade him do because Prexaspes was a man of great weight with his countrymen, and had often declared in public that Smerdis, the son of Cyrus, was still alive, and denied being his murderer. Prexaspes said he was quite ready to do their will in the matter, so the Magi assembled the people, and placed Prexaspes upon the top of the tower, and told him to make his speech. Then this man, forgetting of set purpose all that the Magi had entreated him to say, began with Achaemenes, and traced down the descent of Cyrus. After which, when he came to that king, he recounted all the services that had been rendered by him to the Persians, from whence he went on to declare the truth, which hitherto he had concealed, he said, because it would not have been safe for him to make it known. But now necessity was laid on him to disclose the whole. Then he told how, forced to it by Cambyses, he had himself taken the life of Smerdis, son of Cyrus, and how that Persia was now ruled by the Magi. Last of all, with many curses upon the Persians if they did not recover the kingdom and wreak vengeance on the Magi, he threw himself headlong from the tower into the abyss below. Such was the end of Prexaspes, a man all his life of high repute among the Persians. And now the 7 Persians, having resolved that they would attack the Magi without more delay, first offered prayers to the gods, and then set off for the palace, quite unacquainted with what had been done by Prexaspes. The news of his doings reached them upon their way, when they had accomplished about half the distance. Hereupon they turned aside out of the road and consulted together. Otanes and his party said they must certainly put off the business and not make the attack when affairs were in such a ferment. Darius, on the other hand, and his friends were against any change of plan, and wished to go straight on and not lose a moment. Now as they strove together, suddenly there came in sight 2 pairs of vultures and 7 pairs of hawks pursuing them. And the hawks tore the vultures both with their claws and bills. At this sight the 7 with one accord came into the opinion of Darius, and encouraged by the omen hastened on towards the palace. At the gate they were received as Darius had foretold. The guards, who had no suspicion that they came for any ill purpose, and held the chief Persians in much reverence, let them pass without difficulty. It seemed as if they were under the special protection of the gods. None even asked them any question. When they were now in the great court, they fell in with certain of the eunuchs, whose business it was to carry the king's messages, who stopped them and asked them what they wanted, while at the same time they threatened the doorkeepers for having let them enter. The 7 sought to press on, but the eunuchs wouldn't suffer them. Then these men, with cheers, encouraging one another, drew their daggers, and stabbing those who strove to withstand them, rushed forward to the apartment of the males. Now both the Magi were at this time within, holding counsel upon the matter of Prexaspes. So when they heard the stir among the eunuchs, and their loud cries, they ran out themselves to see what was happening. Instantly perceiving their danger, they both flew to arms. One had just time to seize his bow, the other got hold of his lance, when straightway the fight began. The one whose weapon was the bow found it of no service at all. The foe was too near, and the combat too close to allow of his using it. But the other made a stout defence with his lance, wounding 2 of the 7, Aspathenes in the leg, and Interfernes in the eye. This wound did not kill Interfernes, but it cost him the sight of that eye. The other Magus, when he found his bow of no avail, fled into a chamber which opened out into the apartment of the males, intending to shut to the doors. But 2 of the 7 entered the room with him, Darius and Gobryas. Gobryas seized the Magus and grappled with him, while Darius stood over them, not knowing what to do, for it was dark, and he was afraid that if he struck the blow he might kill Gobryas. Then Gobryas, when he perceived that Darius stood doing nothing, asked him why his hand was idle. "I fear to hurt thee," he answered. "Fear not," said Gobryas, "strike, though it be through both." Darius did as he desired, drove his dagger home, and by good hap killed the Magus. Thus were the Magi slain, and the 7 cutting off both the heads, and leaving their own wounded in the palace, partly because they were disabled, and partly to guard the citadel, went forth from the gates with the heads in their hands, shouting and making an uproar. They called out to all the Persians that they met, and told them what had happened, showing them the heads of the Magi, while at the same time they slew every Magus who fell in their way. Then the Persians, when they knew what the 7 had done, and understood the fraud of the Magi, thought it but just to follow the example set them, and drawing their daggers they killed the Magi wherever they could find any. Such was their fury that unless the night had closed in, not a single Magus would have been left alive. The Persians observe this day with one accord, and keep it more strictly than any other in the whole year. It's then that they hold the great festival, which they called the Megaphonia. No magus may show himself abroad during the whole time that the feast lasts, but all must remain at home the entire day. And now, when 5 days were gone, and the hubbub had settled down, the conspirators met together to consult about the situation of affairs. At this meeting speeches were made, to which many of the Greeks gave no credence, but they were made nevertheless. Otanes recommended that the management of public affairs should be entrusted to the whole nation. To me, he said, it seems advisable that we should no longer have a single man to rule over us. The rule of one is neither good nor pleasant. Ye cannot have forgotten to what lengths Cambyses went in his haughty tyranny, and the haughtiness of the Magi ye have yourselves experienced. How indeed is it possible that monarchy should be a well-adjusted thing when it allows a man to do as he likes without being answerable? Such license is enough to stir strange and unwonted thoughts in the heart of the worthiest of men. Give a person this power, and straightway his manifold good things puff him up with pride, while envy is so natural to humankind that it cannot but arise in him. But pride and envy together include all wickedness, both of them leading on to deeds of savage violence. True it is that kings, possessing as they do all that heart can desire, ought to be void of envy, but the contrary is seen in their conduct towards the citizens. They are jealous of the most virtuous among their subjects, and wish their death, while they take delight in the meanest and basest, being ever ready to listen to the tales of slanderers. A king, besides, is beyond all other men inconsistent with himself. Pay him court in moderation, and he's angry because you do not show him more profound respect. Show him profound respect, and he's offended again, because, as he says, you fawn on him. But the worst of all is that he sets aside the laws of the land, puts men to death without trial, and subjects women to violence. The rule of the many, on the other hand, has, in the first place, the fairest of names, to wit, isonomy, and further, it's free from all those outrages which a king is wont to commit. There places are given by lot, the magistrate is answerable for what he does, and measures rest with the commonalty. I vote, therefore, that we do away with the monarchy, and raise the people to power, for the people are all in all. Such were the sentiments of Otanes. Megabyzus spoke next, and advised the setting up of an oligarchy. In all that Otanes has said to persuade you to put down monarchy, he observed, I fully concur, but his recommendation that we should call the people to power seems to me not the best advice. For there is nothing so void of understanding, nothing so full of wantonness as the unwieldy rabble. It were folly not to be born for men, while seeking to escape the wantonness of a tyrant, to give themselves up to the wantonness of a rude, unbridled mob. The tyrant, in all his doings, at least knows what he is about, but a mob is altogether devoid of knowledge. For how should there be any knowledge in a rabble untaught, and with no natural sense of what is right and fit? It rushes wildly into state affairs with all the fury of a stream swollen in the winter, and confuses everything. Let the enemies of the Persians be ruled by democracies, but let us choose out from the citizens a certain number of the worthiest, and put the government into their hands. For thus both we ourselves shall be among the governors, and power being entrusted to the best men, it's likely that the best counsels will prevail in the state. This was the advice which Megabyzus gave, and after him Darius came forward and spoke as follows. All that Megabyzus said against democracy was well said, I think, but about oligarchy he didn't speak advisedly. For take these three forms of government, democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy, and let them each be at their best. I maintain that monarchy far surpasses the other two. What government can possibly be better than that of the very best man in the whole state? The counsels of such a man are like himself, and so he governs the mass of the people to their heart's content, while at the same time his measures against evildoers are kept more secret than in other states. Contrariwise, in oligarchies, where men vie with each other in the service of the commonwealth, Fierce enmities are apt to arise between man and man, each wishing to be leader, and to carry his own measures, whence violent quarrels come, which lead to open strife, often ending in bloodshed. Then monarchy is sure to follow, and this too shows how far that rule surpasses all others. Again, in a democracy it's impossible but that there will be malpractices. These malpractices, however, do not lead to enmities, but to close friendships, which are formed among those engaged in them, who must hold well together to carry on their villainies. And so things go on until a man stands forth as champion of the commonalty and puts down the evildoers. Straightway the author of so great a service is admired by all, and from being admired soon comes to be appointed king. So that here too it's plain that monarchy is the best government. Lastly, to sum up all in a word, whence, I ask, was it that we got the freedom which we enjoy? Did democracy give it us, or oligarchy, or a monarch? As a single man recovered our freedom for us, my sentence is that we keep to the rule of one. Even apart from this, we ought not to change the laws of our forefathers when they work fairly, for to do so is not well. Such were the 3 opinions brought forward at this meeting. The 4 other Persians voted in favour of the last. Otanes, who wished to give his countrymen a democracy, when he found the decision against him, arose a second time and spoke thus before the assembly. Brother conspirators, it's plain that the king who is to be chosen will be one of ourselves, whether we make the choice by casting lots for the prize, or by letting the people decide which of us they will have to rule over them, or in any other way. Now, as I've neither a mind to rule nor to be ruled, I shall not enter the lists with you in this matter. I withdraw, however, on one condition. None of you shall claim to exercise rule over me or my seed forever. The 6 agreed to these terms, and Otanes withdrew and stood aloof from the contest. And still, to this day, the family of Otanes continues to be the only free family in Persia. Those who belong to it submit to the rule of the king only so far as they themselves choose. They are bound, however, to observe the laws of the land, like the other Persians. After this, the 6 took counsel together as to the fairest way of setting up a king. And first, with respect to Otanes, they resolved that if any of their own number got the kingdom, Otanes and his seed after him should receive, year by year, as a mark of special honour, a Median robe, and all such other gifts as are accounted the most honourable in Persia. And these they resolved to give him because he was the man who first planned the outbreak, and who brought the 7 together. These privileges, therefore, were assigned specially to Otanes. The following were made common to them all. It was to be free to each, whenever he pleased, to enter the palace unannounced, unless the king were in the company of one of his wives. And the king was to be bound to marry into no family excepting those of the conspirators. Concerning the appointment of a king, the resolve to which they came was the following. They would ride out together next morning into the skirts of the city, and he whose steed first neighed after the sun was up should have the kingdom. Now Darius had a groom, a sharp-witted knave, called Obares. After the meeting had broken up, Darius sent for him and said, Obares, this is the way in which the king is to be chosen. We are to mount our horses, and the man whose horse first neighs after the sun is up is to have the kingdom. If, then, you have any cleverness, contrive a plan whereby the prize may fall to us, and not go to another. Truly, master, Obares answered, if it depends on this, whether thou shalt be king or no, set thine heart at ease, and fear nothing. I have a charm which is sure not to fail. If thou hast really aught of the kind, said Darius, hasten to get it ready. The matter doesn't brook delay, for the trial is to be tomorrow. So Obares, when he heard that, did as follows. When night came, he took one of the mares, the chief favourite of the horse which Darius rode, and tethering it in the suburb, brought his master's horse to the place. Then, after leading him round and round the mare several times, nearer and nearer to each circuit, he ended by letting them come together. And now, when the morning broke, the 6 Persians, according to agreement, met together on horseback and rode out to the suburb. As they went along, they neared the spot where the mare was tethered the night before, whereupon the horse of Darius sprang forward and neighed. Just at the same time, though the sky was clear and bright, there was a flash of lightning, followed by a thunderclap. It seemed as if the heavens conspired with Darius, and hereby inaugurated him king. So the 5 other nobles leapt with one accord from their steeds, and bowed down before him, and owned him for their king. This is the account which some of the Persians gave of the contrivance of Abares, but there are others who relate the matter differently. They say that in the morning he stroked the mare with his hand, which he then hid in his trousers until the sun rose and the horses were about to start, when he suddenly drew his hand forth and put it to the nostrils of his master's horse, which immediately snorted and neighed. Thus was Darius, son of Hystaspes, appointed king. And, except the Arabians, all they of Asia were subject to him. For Cyrus, and after him Cambyses, had brought them all under. The Arabians were never subject as slaves to the Persians, but they had a league of friendship with them from the time when they brought Cambyses on his way as he went into Egypt. For had they been unfriendly, the Persians could never have made their invasion. And now Darius contracted marriages of the first rank, according to the notions of the Persians, to wit, with 2 daughters of Cyrus, Atossa and Artistone, of whom Atossa had been twice married before, and one to Cambyses her brother, and once to the Magus, while the other, Artistone, was a virgin. He married also Paramis, daughter of Smerdis, son of Cyrus, and he likewise took to wife the daughter of Otanes, who had made the discovery about the Magus. And now, when his power was established firmly throughout all the kingdoms, the first thing that he did was to set up a carving in stone which showed a man mounting upon a horse, with an inscription in these words following: Darius, son of Hystaspes, by aid of his good horse, here followed the horse's name, and of his good groom Abares, got himself the kingdom of the Persians. This he set up in Persia, and afterwards he proceeded to establish 20 governments of the kind which the Persians call satrapies, assigning to each its governor, and fixing the tribute which was to be paid him by the several nations. And generally he joined together in one satrapy the nations that were neighbours, but sometimes he passed over the nearer tribes, and put in their stead those which were more remote. The following is an account of these governments, and of the yearly tribute which they paid to the king. Such as brought their tribute in silver were ordered to pay according to the Babylonian talent, while the Euboic was the standard measure for such as brought gold. Now the Babylonian talent contains 70 Euboic minae. During all the reign of Cyrus, and afterwards when Cambyses ruled, there were no fixed tributes, but the nations severally brought gifts to the king. On account of this and other like doings, the Persians say that Darius was a huckster, and Cambyses a master, and Cyrus a father. For Darius looked to making a gain in everything. Cambyses was harsh and reckless, while Cyrus was gentle and procured them all manner of goods. The Ionians, the Magnesians of Asia, the Aeolians, the Carians, the Lycians, the Melians, and the Pamphylians paid their tribute in a single sum, which was fixed at 400 talents of silver. These formed together the first satrapy. The Mysians, Lydians, Lysonians, Cabalians, Hagenians paid the sum of 500 talents. This was the second satrapy. The Hellespontians of the right coast as one enters the straits, the Phrygians, the Asiatic Thracians, the Paphlagonians, the Mariandynians, and the Syrians paid a tribute of 360 talents. This was the third satrapy. The Cilicians gave 360 white horses, one for each day of the year, and 500 talents of silver. Of this sum, 140 talents went to pay the cavalry which guarded the country, while the remaining 360 were received by Darius. This was the fourth satrapy. The country reaching from the city of Posidaeum, built by Amphilochus, son of Amphiaraus, on the confines of Syria and Cilicia, to the borders of Egypt, excluding therefrom a district which belonged to Arabia and was free from tax, paid a tribute of 350 talents. All Phoenicia, Palestine, Syria, and Cyprus were herein contained. This was the fifth satrapy. From Egypt and the neighbouring parts of Libya, together with the towns of Cyrene and Barca, which belonged to the Egyptian satrapy, the tribute which came in was 700 talents. These 700 talents did not include the profits of the fisheries of Lake Moeris, nor the corn furnished to the troops at Memphis. Corn was supplied to 120,000 Persians who dwelt at Memphis in the quarter called the White Castle, and to a number of auxiliaries. This was the sixth satrapy. The Satagidians, the Gadarians, the Dadatki, and the Apariti, who were all reckoned together, paid a tribute of 170 talents. This was the seventh satrapy. Susa and the other parts of Scythia paid 300 talents. This was the eighth satrapy. From Babylonia and the rest of Assyria were drawn 1,000 talents of silver and 500 boy eunuchs. This was the ninth satrapy. Agpatana and the other parts of Media, together with the Paricanians and the Orthocorybantes, paid in all 450 talents. This was the 10th satrapy. The Caspians, Porsicae, Pantimathi, and Daditai were joined in one government and paid the sum of 200 talents. This was the 11th satrapy. From the Bactrian tribes as far as the Igli, the tribute received was 360 talents. This was the 12th satrapy. From Pactica and Armenia and the countries reaching thence to the Euxine, the sum drawn was 400 talents. This was the 13th satrapy. The Sagartians, Sarangians, Pamanians, Utians, and Macians, together with the inhabitants of the islands in the Erythraean Sea, where the king sends those whom he banishes, furnished together a tribute of 600 talents. This was the 14th satrapy. The Sarkans and Caspians gave 250 talents. This was the 15th satrapy. The Parthians, Chorasmians, Sogdians, and Arians gave 300. This was the 16th satrapy. The Paricanians and Ethiopians of Asia furnished a tribute of 400 talents. This was the 17th satrapy. The Matianians, Saspires, and Alorodians were rated to pay 200 talents. This was the 18th satrapy. The Musci, Tiberini, Macrones, Mossynoeci, and Maries had to pay 300 talents. This was the 19th satrapy. The Indians, who are more numerous than any other nation with which we're acquainted, paid a tribute exceeding that of every other people, to wit 360 talents of gold dust. This was the 20th satrapy. If the Babylonian money here spoken of be reduced to the Euboic scale, it will make 9,540 such talents, and if the gold be reckoned at 13 times the worth of silver, the Indian gold dust will come to 4,680 talents. Add those two amounts together, and the whole revenue which came into Darius year by year will be found to be, in Euboic money, 14,560 talents, not to mention parts of a talent. Such was the revenue which Darius derived from Asia and a small part of Libya. Later in his reign the sum was increased by the tribute of the islands and of the nations of Europe as far as Thessaly. The great king stores away the tribute which he receives after this fashion. He melts it down, and while it's in a liquid state, runs it into earthen vessels, which are afterwards removed, leaving the metal in a solid mass. When money is wanted, he coins as much of this bullion as the occasion requires. Such then were the governments, and such the amounts of tribute at which they were assessed respectively. Persia alone has not been reckoned among the tributaries, and for this reason, because the country of the Persians is altogether exempt from tax. The following peoples paid no settled tribute, but brought gifts to the king. First, the Ethiopians bordering upon Egypt, who were reduced by Cambyses when he made war on the long-lived Ethiopians, and who dwell about the sacred city of Nysa, and have festivals in honor of Dionysus. The grain on which they and their next neighbors feed is the same as that used by the Kalantian Indians. Their dwelling houses are underground. Every third year these two nations brought, and they still bring to my day, 2 koinekes of virgin gold, 200 logs of ebony, 5 Ethiopian boys, and 12 elephant tusks. The Colchians and the neighboring tribes who dwell between them and the Caucasus, for so far the Persian rule reaches, while north of the Caucasus no one fears them any longer, undertook to furnish a gift which in my day was still brought every 5th year, consisting of 100 boys and the same number of maidens. The Arabs brought every year 1,000 talents of frankincense. Such were the gifts which the king received over and above the tribute money. The way in which the Indians get the plentiful supply of gold which enables them to furnish year by year so vast an amount of gold dust to the king is the following. Eastward of India lies a tract which is entirely sand. Indeed, of all the inhabitants of Asia concerning whom anything certain is known, the Indians dwell the nearest to the east and to the rising of the sun. Beyond them the whole country is desert on account of the sand. The tribes of Indians are numerous and don't all speak the same language. Some are wandering tribes, others not. They who dwell in the marshes along the river live on raw fish, which they take in boats made of reeds, each formed out of a single joint. These Indians wear a dress of sedge, which they cut in the river and bruise. Afterwards they weave it into mats, and wear it, as we wear a breastplate. Eastward of these Indians are another tribe, called Padians, who are wanderers and live on raw flesh. This tribe is said to have the following customs. If one of their number be ill, man or woman, they take the sick person, and if he be a man, the men of his acquaintance proceed to put him to death, because, they say, his flesh would be spoilt for them if he pined and wasted away with sickness. The man protests he is not ill in the least, but his friends will not accept his denial. In spite of all he can say, they kill him and feast themselves on his body. So also if a woman be sick, the women, who are her friends, take her and do with her exactly the same as the men. If one of them reaches to old age, about which there is seldom any question, as commonly before that time they have had some disease or other, and so have been put to death, but if a man, notwithstanding, comes to be old, then they offer him in sacrifice to their gods, and afterwards eat his flesh. There is another set of Indians whose customs are very different. They refuse to put any live animal to death, they sow no corn, and have no dwelling houses. Vegetables are their only food. Vegetables are their only food. There's a plant which grows wild in their country, bearing seed about the size of millet seed in a calyx. Their wont is to gather this seed, and having boiled it, calyx and all, to use it for food. If one of them is attacked with sickness, he goes forth into the wilderness and lies down to die. No one has the least concern either for the sick or for the dead. All the tribes which I've mentioned mate together in the open like the brute beasts. They have also the same tint of skin which approaches that of the Ethiopians. Their seed, which enters into the women, is not white like that of other men, but black like their skin. The seed of the Ethiopians is also black. Their country is a long way from Persia towards the south, nor had King Darius ever any authority over them. Besides these, there are Indians of another tribe, who border on the city of Caspityrus and the country of Pactaica. These people dwell northward of all the rest of the Indians, and follow nearly the same mode of life as the Bactrians. They are more warlike than any of the other tribes, and from them the men are sent forth who go to procure the gold. For it's in this part of India that the sandy desert lies. Here in this desert there live amid the sand great ants, in size somewhat less than dogs, but bigger than foxes. The Persian king has a number of them, which have been caught by the hunters in the land whereof we are speaking. Those ants make their dwellings underground, and like the Greek ants, which they very much resemble in shape, throw up sand heaps as they burrow. Now the sand which they throw up is full of gold. The Indians, when they go into the desert to collect this sand, take 3 camels and harness them together, a female in the middle and a male on either side, in a leading rein. The rider sits on the female, and they are particular to choose for the purpose one that has but just dropped her young, for the female camels can run as fast as horses, while they bear burthens very much better. As the Greeks are well acquainted with the shape of the camel, I shall not trouble to describe it, but I shall mention what seems to have escaped their notice. The camel has in its hind legs 4 thigh bones and 4 knee joints, and its genitalia are turned towards the tail between its hind legs. When the Indians therefore have thus equipped themselves to set off in quest of the gold, calculating the time so that they may be engaged in seizing it during the most sultry part of the day, when the ants hide themselves to escape the heat, the sun in those parts shines fiercest in the morning, not as elsewhere at noonday. The greatest heat is from the time when he has reached a certain height until the hour at which the market closes. During this space he burns much more furiously than at midday in Greece, so that the men there are said at that time to drench themselves with water. At noon his heat is much the same in India as in other countries, after which, as the day declines, the warmth is only equal to that of the morning sun elsewhere. Towards evening the coolness increases till about sunset it becomes very cold. When the Indians reach the place where the gold is, they fill their bags with the sand and ride away at their best speed. The ants, however, scenting them, as the Persians say, rush forth in pursuit. Now these animals are, they declare, so swift that there's nothing in the world like them. If it were not, therefore, that the Indians get a start while the ants are mustering, not a single gold-gatherer could escape. During the flight, the male camels, which are not so fleet as the females, grow tired and begin to drag, first one and then the other, but the females recollect the young which they have left behind and never give way or flag. Such, according to the Persians, is the manner in which the Indians get the greater part of their gold. Some is dug out of the earth, but of this the supply is more scanty. It seems as if the extreme regions of the earth were blessed by nature with the most excellent productions, just in the same way that Greece enjoys a climate more excellently tempered than any other country. In India, which, as I observed lately, is the furthest region of the inhabited world towards the east, all the 4-footed beasts and the birds are very much bigger than those found elsewhere, except only the horses, which are surpassed by the median breed called the Nisaean. And gold, too, is produced there in vast abundance, some dug from the earth, some washed down by the rivers, some carried off in the mode which I have but now described. And further, there are trees which grow wild there, the fruit whereof is a wool, exceeding in beauty and goodness that of sheep. The natives make their clothes of this tree wool. Arabia is the last of inhabited lands towards the south, and it's the only country which produces frankincense, myrrh, cassia, cinnamon, and ladanum. The Arabians don't get any of these except the myrrh without trouble. The frankincense they procure by means of the gum styrax, which the Greeks obtain from the Phoenicians. This they burn, and thereby obtain the spice. For the trees which bear the frankincense are guarded by winged serpents, small in size and of varied colours, whereof vast numbers hang about every tree. They're of the same kind as the serpents that invade Egypt. And there's nothing but the smoke of the styrax which will drive them from the trees. The Arabians say that the whole world would swarm with these serpents if they were not kept in check in the way in which I know that vipers are. Of a truth, divine providence does appear to be, as indeed one might expect beforehand, a wise contriver. For timid animals which are a prey to others are all made to produce young abundantly, that so the species may not be entirely eaten up and lost, while savage and noxious creatures are made very unfruitful. The hare, for instance, which is hunted alike by beasts, birds, and men, breeds so abundantly as even to superfetate, a thing which is true of no other animal. You find in a hare's belly, at one and the same time, some of the young all covered with fur, others quite naked, others again just fully formed in the womb, while the hare perhaps has lately conceived afresh. The lioness, on the other hand, which is one of the strongest and boldest of brutes, brings forth young but once in her lifetime, and then a single cub. She can't possibly conceive again, since she loses her womb at the same time that she drops her young. The reason of this is that as soon as the cub begins to stir inside the dam, his claws, which are sharper than those of any other animal, scratch the womb. As the time goes on and he grows bigger, he tears it ever more and more, so that at last, when the birth comes, there is not a morsel in the whole womb that is sound. Now, with respect to the vipers and the winged snakes of Arabia, if they increased as fast as their nature would allow, impossible were it for man to maintain himself upon the earth. Accordingly, it's found that when the male and female come together at the very moment of impregnation, the female seizes the male by the neck, and having once fastened, cannot be brought to leave go till she has bit the neck entirely through. And so the male perishes. But after a while he's revenged upon the female by means of the young, which, while still unborn, gnaw a passage through the womb, and then through the belly of their mother, and so make their entrance into the world. Contrariwise, other snakes, which are harmless, lay eggs, and hatch a vast number of young. Vipers are found in all parts of the world, but the winged serpents are nowhere seen except in Arabia, where they're all congregated together. This makes them appear so numerous. Such, then, is the way in which the Arabians obtain their frankincense. Their manner of collecting the cassia is the following. They cover all their body and their face with the hides of oxen and other skins, leaving only holes for the eyes, and thus protected go in search of the cassia, which grows in a lake of no great depth. All round the shores and in the lake itself there dwell a number of winged animals, much resembling bats, which screech horribly and are very valiant. These creatures they must keep from their eyes all the while that they gather the cassia. Still more wonderful is the mode in which they collect the cinnamon. Where the wood grows and what country produces it they can't tell. Only some, following probability, relate that it comes from the country in which Dionysus was brought up. Great birds, they say, bring the sticks, which we Greeks, taking the word from the Phoenicians, call cinnamon, and carry them up into the air to make their nests. These are fastened with a sort of mud to a sheer face of rock where no foot of man is able to climb. So the Arabians, to get the cinnamon, use the following artifice. They cut all the oxen and asses and beasts of burden that die in their land into large pieces, which they carry with them into those regions, and place near the nests. Then they withdraw to a distance, and the old birds, swooping down, seize the pieces of meat and fly with them up to their nests, which, not being able to support the weight, break off and fall to the ground. Hereupon the Arabians return and collect the cinnamon, which is afterwards carried from Arabia into other countries. Ladanum, which the Arabs call laudanum, is procured in a yet stranger fashion. Found in a most inodorous place, it's the sweetest scented of all substances. It's gathered from the beards of she-goats, where it's found sticking like gum, having come from the bushes on which they browse. It's used in many sorts of unguents, and is what the Arabs burn, chiefly as incense. Concerning the spices of Arabia, let no more be said. The whole country is scented with them, and exhales an odour marvellously sweet. There are also in Arabia 2 kinds of sheep, worthy of admiration, the like of which is nowhere else to be seen. The one kind has long tails, not less than 3 cubits in length, which if they were allowed to trail on the ground would be bruised and fall into sores. As it is, all the shepherds know enough of carpentering to make little trucks for their sheep's tails. The trucks are placed under the tails, each sheep having one to himself, and the tails are then tied down upon them. The other kind has a broad tail, which is a cubit across sometimes. Where the south declines towards the setting sun lies the country called Ethiopia, the last inhabited land in that direction. There gold is obtained in great plenty. Huge elephants abound, with wild trees of all sorts, and ebony, and the men are taller, handsomer, and longer lived than anywhere else. Now these are the furthest regions of the world in Asia and Libya. Of the extreme tracts of Europe towards the west I can't speak with any certainty, for I don't allow that there is any river to which the barbarians give the name of Eridanus, emptying itself into the northern sea, whence, as the tale goes, amber is procured, nor do I know of any islands called the Cassiterides, tin islands, whence the tin comes which we use. For in the first place the name Eridanus is manifestly not a barbarian word at all, but a Greek name, invented by some poet or other. And secondly, though I've taken vast pains, I've never been able to get an assurance from an eyewitness that there is any sea on the further side of Europe. Nevertheless, tin and amber do certainly come to us from the ends of the earth. The northern parts of Europe are very much richer in gold than any other region, but how it's procured I have no certain knowledge. The story runs that the one-eyed Arimaspi purloin it from the Griffins, but here too I'm incredulous, and can't persuade myself that there is a race of men born with one eye, who in all else resemble the rest of mankind. Nevertheless, it seems to be true that the extreme regions of the earth, which surround and shut up within themselves all other countries, produce the things which are the rarest, and which men reckon the most beautiful. There's a plain in Asia which is shut in on all sides by a mountain range, and in this mountain range are 5 openings. The plain lies on the confines of the Chorasmians, Hyrcanians, Parthians, Sarangians, and Thamanians, and belonged formerly to the first mentioned of those peoples. Ever since the Persians, however, obtained the mastery of Asia, it's been the property of the great king. A mighty river, called the Aces, flows from the hills enclosing the plain, and this stream, formerly splitting into 5 channels, ran through the 5 openings in the hills, and watered the lands of the 5 nations which dwell around. The Persian came, however, and conquered the region, and then it went ill with the people of these lands. The great king blocked up all the passages between the hills, and dikes and floodgates, and so prevented the water from flowing out. Then the plain within the hills became a sea, for the river kept rising, and the water could find no outlet. From that time the 5 nations, which were wont formerly to have the use of the stream, losing their accustomed supply of water, have been in great distress. In winter, indeed, they have rain from heaven like the rest of the world, but in summer, after sowing their millet and their sesame, they always stood in need of water from the river. When therefore they suffer from this want, hastening to Persia, men and women alike, they take their station at the gate of the king's palace and wail aloud. Then the king orders the floodgates to be opened towards the country whose need is greatest, and lets the soil drink until it has had enough, after which the gates on this side are shut, and others are unclosed for the nation which of the remainder needs it most. It's been told me that the king never gives the order to open the gates till the suppliants have paid him a large sum of money over and above the tribute. Of the 7 Persians who rose up against the Magus, one Intophernes lost his life very shortly after the outbreak for an act of insolence. He wished to enter the palace and transact a certain business with the king. Now the law was that all those who had taken part in the rising against the Magus might enter unannounced into the king's presence, unless he happened to be in private with his wife. So Interfernes would not have any one announce him, but as he belonged to the seven, claimed it as his right to go in. The doorkeeper, however, and the chief usher forbade his entrance, since the king, they said, was with his wife. But Interfernes thought they told lies. So, drawing his scimitar, he cut off their noses and their ears, and hanging them on the bridle of his horse, put the bridle round their necks, and so let them go. Then these two men went and showed themselves to the king, and told him how it had come to pass that they were thus treated. Darius trembled lest it was by the common consent of the six that the deed had been done. He therefore sent for them all in turn, and sounded them to know if they approved the conduct of Interfernes. When he found by their answers that there had been no concert between him and them, he laid hands on Interfernes, his children, and all his near kindred, strongly suspecting that he and his friends were about to raise a revolt. When all had been seized and put in chains, as malefactors condemned to death, the wife of Interfernes came and stood continually at the palace gates, weeping and wailing sore. So Darius, after a while, seeing that she never ceased to stand and weep, was touched with pity for her, and bade a messenger go to her and say, Lady, King Darius gives thee as a boon the life of one of thy kinsmen. Choose which thou wilt of the prisoners. Then she pondered a while before she answered, If the king grants me the life of one alone, I make choice of my brother. Darius, when he heard the reply, was astonished, and sent again, saying, Lady, the king bids thee tell him why it is that thou passest by thy husband and thy children, and preferest to have the life of thy brother spared. He's not so near to thee as thy children, nor so dear as thy husband. And she answered, O king, if the gods will, I may have another husband and other children when these are gone. But as my father and my mother are no more, it's impossible that I should have another brother. This was my thought when I asked to have my brother spared. Then it seemed to Darius that the lady spoke well, and he gave her, besides the life that she had asked, the life also of her eldest son, because he was greatly pleased with her. But he slew all the rest. Thus one of the seven died in the way I've described, very shortly after the insurrection. About the time of Cambyses' last sickness, the following events happened. There was a certain Herodotus, a Persian, whom Cyrus had made governor of Sardis. This man conceived a most unholy wish. He had never suffered wrong, or had an ill word from Polycrates the Samian. Nay, he had not so much as seen him in all his life, yet notwithstanding he conceived the wish to seize him and put him to death. This wish, according to the account which the most part give, arose from what happened one day as he was sitting with another Persian in the gate of the king's palace. The man's name was Metrobates, and he was ruler of the satrapy of Dascylium. He and Herodotus had been talking together, and from talking they fell to quarrelling, and comparing their merits, whereupon Metrobates said to Herodotus reproachfully, Art thou worthy to be called a man, when near as Samos lies to thy government, and easy as it is to conquer, thou hast omitted to bring it under the dominion of the king? Easy to conquer, said I, why, a mere common citizen, with the help of 15 men-at-arms, mastered the island, and is still king of it. Herodotus, they say, took this reproach greatly to heart, but instead of seeking to revenge himself on the man by whom it was uttered, he conceived the desire of destroying Polycrates, since it was on Polycrates' account that the reproach had fallen on him. Another less common version of the story is that Herodotus sent a herald to Samos to make a request, the nature of which is not stated. Polycrates was at the time reclining in the apartment of the males, and Anacreon the Taian was with him. When therefore the herald came forward to converse, Polycrates, either out of studied contempt for the power of Herodotus, or it may be merely by chance, was lying with his face turned away towards the wall. And so he lay all the time that the herald spake, and when he ended, didn't even vouchsafe him a word. Such are the two reasons alleged for the death of Polycrates. It's open to all to believe which they please. What's certain is that Herodotus, while residing at Magnesia, on the Maeander, sent a Lydian by name Myrsus, the son of Gyges, with a message to Polycrates at Samos, well knowing what that monarch designed. For Polycrates entertained a design which no other Greek, so far as we know, ever formed before him, unless it were Minos the Cnossian, and those, if there were any such, who had the mastery of the Aegean at an earlier time. Polycrates, I say, was the first of mere human birth who conceived the design of gaining the empire of the sea, and aspired to rule over Ionia and the islands. Knowing then that Polycrates was thus minded, Herodotus sent his message, which ran as follows. Herodotus to Polycrates thus saith, I hear thou raisest thy thoughts high, but thy means are not equal to thy ambition. Listen then to my words, and learn how thou mayst at once serve thyself and preserve me. King Cambyses is bent on my destruction. Of this I have warning from a sure hand. Come thou therefore and fetch me away, me and all my wealth. Share my wealth with me, and then, so far as money can aid, thou mayst make thyself master of the whole of Greece. But if thou doubtest of my wealth, send the trustiest of thy followers, and I will show my treasures to him. Polycrates, when he heard this message, was full of joy, and straightway approved the terms. But as money was what he chiefly desired, before stirring in the business, he sent his secretary, Maeandrius, son of Maeandrius, a Samian, to look into the matter. This was the man who not very long afterwards made an offering at the temple of Hera of all the furniture which had adorned the male apartments in the palace of Polycrates, an offering well worth seeing. Herodotus, learning that one was coming to view his treasures, contrived as follows. He filled 8 great chests, almost brimful of stones, and then, covering over the stones with gold, corded the chests, and so held them in readiness. When Maeandrius arrived, he was shown this as Herodotus' treasure, and having seen it, returned to Samos. On hearing his account, Polycrates, notwithstanding many warnings given him by the soothsayers and much dissuasion of his friends, made ready to go in person. Even the dream which visited his daughter failed to check him. She had dreamed that she saw her father hanging high in air, washed by Jove, and anointed by the sun. Having therefore thus dreamed, she used every effort to prevent her father from going, even as he went on board his Pentaconta, crying after him with words of evil omen. Then Polycrates threatened her that if he returned in safety he would keep her unmarried many years. She answered, oh, that he might perform his threat, far better for her to remain long unmarried than to be bereft of her father. Polycrates, however, making light of all the counsel offered him, set sail and went to Herodotus. Many friends accompanied him, among the rest Democedes, the son of Caliphone, a native of Crotona, who was a physician, and the best skilled in his art of all men then living. Polycrates, on his arrival at Magnesia, perished miserably, in a way unworthy of his rank and of his lofty schemes. For if we accept the Syracusans, there has never been one of the Greek tyrants who was to be compared with Polycrates for magnificence. Herodotus, however, slew him in a mode which is not fit to be described, and then hung his dead body upon a cross. His Samian followers Herodotus let go free, bidding them thank him that they were allowed their liberty. The rest, who were in part slaves, in part free foreigners, he alike treated as his slaves by conquest. Then was the dream of the daughter of Polycrates fulfilled. For Polycrates, as he hung upon the cross, and rain fell on him, was washed by Zeus, and he was anointed by the sun when his own moisture overspread his body. And so the vast good fortune of Polycrates came at last to the end which Amasis, the Egyptian king, had prophesied in days gone by. It wasn't long before retribution for the murder of Polycrates overtook Herodotus. After the death of Cambyses, and during all the time that the Magius sat upon the throne, Herodotus remained in Sardis, and brought no help to the Persians, whom the Medes had robbed of the sovereignty. On the contrary, amid the troubles of this season, he slew Mithridates, the satrap of Daskylium, who had cast the reproach upon him in the matter of Polycrates, and he slew also Mithridates' son, Chronaspes, both men of high repute among the Persians. He was likewise guilty of many other acts of insolence, among the rest of the following. There was a courier sent to him by Darius, whose message was not to his mind. Herodotus had him waylaid and murdered on his road back to the king. The man and his horse both disappeared, and no traces were left of either. Darius, therefore, was no sooner settled upon the throne than he longed to take vengeance upon Herodotus for all his misdoings, and especially for the murder of Mithridates and his son. To send an armed force openly against him, however, he didn't think advisable, as the whole kingdom was still unsettled, and he too was but lately come to the throne, while Herodotus, as he understood, had a great power. In truth, 1,000 Persians attended on him as a bodyguard, and he held the satrapies of Phrygia, Lydia, and Ionia. Darius therefore proceeded by artifice. He called together a meeting of all the chief of the Persians, and thus addressed them. Who among you, O Persians, will undertake to accomplish me a matter by skill without force or tumult? Force is misplaced where the work wants skilful management. Who then will undertake to bring me Herodotus alive, or else to kill him? He never did the Persians any good in his life, and he has wrought us abundant injury. 2 of our number, Mithridates and his son, he has slain, and when messengers go to recall him, even though they have their mandate from me, with an insolence which is not to be endured, he puts them to death. We must kill this man, therefore, before he does the Persians any greater hurt. Thus spoke Darius, and straightway 30 of those present came forward and offered themselves for the work. As they strove together, Darius interfered, and bade them have recourse to the lot. Accordingly, lots were cast, and the task fell to Bagaeus, son of Artontes. Then Bagaeus caused many letters to be written on divers matters, and sealed them all with the king's signet, after which he took the letters with him and departed for Sardis. On his arrival he was shown into the presence of Herodotus, when he uncovered the letters one by one, and giving them to the king's secretary, every satrap has with him a king's secretary, commanded him to read their contents. Herein his design was to try the fidelity of the bodyguard, and to see if they would be likely to fall away from Herodotus. When therefore he saw that they showed the letters all due respect, and even more highly reverenced their contents, he gave the secretary a paper in which was written, "Persians, King Darius forbids you to guard Herodotus." The soldiers at these words laid aside their spears. So Bagaeus, finding that they obeyed this mandate, took courage, and gave into the secretary's hands the last letter, wherein it was written, "King Darius commands the Persians who are in Sardis to kill Herodotus." Then the guards drew their swords, and slew him upon the spot. Thus did retribution for the murder of Polycrates the Samian overtake Herodotus the Persian. Soon after the treasures of Herodotus had been conveyed to Susa, it happened that King Darius, as he leapt from his horse during the chase, sprained his foot. The sprain was one of no common severity, for the ankle bone was forced quite out of the socket. Now Darius already had at his court certain Egyptians whom he reckoned the best skilled physicians in all the world to their aid. Therefore he had recourse, but they twisted the foot so clumsily and used such violence that they only made the mischief greater. For 7 days and 7 nights the king lay without sleep, so grievous was the pain he suffered. On the 8th day of his indisposition, one who had heard before leaving Sardis of the skill of Democedes, the Crotoniat, told Darius, who commanded that he should be brought with all speed into his presence. When therefore they had found him among the slaves of Herodotus, quite uncared for by anyone, they brought him just as he was, clanking his fetters and all clothed in rags, before the king. As soon as he was entered into the presence, Darius asked him if he knew medicine, to which he answered no, for he feared that if he made himself known he would lose all chance of ever again beholding Greece. Darius, however, perceiving that he dealt deceitfully and really understood the art, bade those who had brought him to the presence go fetch the scourges and the pricking irons. Upon this Democedes made confession, but at the same time said that he had no thorough knowledge of medicine. He had but lived some time with a physician, and in this way had gained a slight smattering of the art. However, Darius put himself under his care, and Democedes, by using the remedies customary among the Greeks, and exchanging the violent treatment of the Egyptians for milder means, first enabled him to get some sleep, and then in a very little time restored him altogether, after he had quite lost the hope of ever having the use of his foot. Hereupon the king presented Democedes with 2 sets of fetters wrought in gold. So Democedes asked if he meant to double his sufferings because he had brought him back to health. Darius was pleased at the speech, and bade the eunuchs take Democedes to see his wives, which they did accordingly, telling them all that this was the man who had saved the king's life. Then each of the wives dipped with a saucer into a chest of gold, and gave so bountifully to Democedes that a slave named Sceton, who followed him and picked up the staters which fell from the saucers, gathered together a great heap of gold. This Democedes left his country and became attached to Polycrates in the following way. His father, who dwelt at Crotona, was a man of a savage temper, and treated him cruelly. When therefore he could no longer bear such constant ill usage, Democedes left his home and sailed away to Aegina. There he set up in business, and succeeded the first year in surpassing all the best skilled physicians of the place, notwithstanding that he was without instruments, and had with him none of the appliances needful for the practice of his art. In the second year the state of Aegina hired his services at the price of a talent. In the third the Athenians engaged him at 100 minae, and in the fourth Polycrates at 2 talents. So he went to Samos, and there took up his abode. It was in no small measure from his success that the Crotonians came to be reckoned such good physicians, for about this period the physicians of Crotona had the name of being the best, and those of Cyrene the second best in all Greece. The Argives about the same time were thought to be the first musicians in Greece. After Democedes had cured Darius at Susa, he dwelt there in a large house, and feasted daily at the king's table, nor did he lack anything that his heart desired, excepting liberty to return to his country. By interceding for them with Darius, he saved the lives of the Egyptian physicians who had had the care of the king before he came, when they were about to be impaled, because they had been surpassed by a Greek. And further, he succeeded in rescuing an Elean soothsayer who had followed the fortunes of Polycrates and was lying in utter neglect among his slaves. In short, there was no one who stood so high as Democedes in the favour of the king. Moreover, within a little while it happened that Atossa, the daughter of Cyrus, who was married to Darius, had a boil form upon her breast, which after it burst began to spread and increase. Now, so long as the sore was of no great size, she hid it through shame, and made no mention of it to anyone. But when it became worse, she sent at last for Democedes and showed it to him. Democedes said that he would make her well, but she must first promise him with an oath that if he cured her, she would grant him whatever request he might prefer, assuring her at the same time that it should be nothing which she could blush to hear. On these terms Democedes applied his art and soon cured the abscess, and Atossa, when she had heard his request, spake thus one night to Darius. It seemeth to me strange, my lord, that with the mighty power which is thine, thou sittest idle, and neither makest any conquests, nor advancest the power of the Persians. Methinks that one who is so young, and so richly endowed with wealth, should perform some noble achievement to prove to the Persians that it is a man who governs them. Another reason, too, should urge thee to attempt some enterprise. Not only does it befit thee to show the Persians that a man rules them, but for thy own peace thou shouldest waste their strength in wars, lest idleness breed revolt against thy authority. Now, too, whilst thou art still young, thou mayest well accomplish some exploit, for as the body grows in strength, the mind, too, ripens, and as the body ages, the mind's powers decay, till at last it becomes dulled to everything. So spake Atossa, as Democedes had instructed her. Darius answered, Dear lady, thou hast uttered the very thoughts that occupy my brain. I am minded to construct a bridge which shall join our continent with the other, and so carry war into Scythia. Yet a brief space, and all will be accomplished as thou desirest. But Atossa rejoined, Look now, this war with Scythia were best reserved a while, for the Scythians may be conquered at any time. Prithee, lead me thy host first into Greece. I long to be served by some of those Lacedaemonian maids of whom I have heard so much. I want also Argive and Athenian and Corinthian women. There's now at the court a man who can tell thee better than anyone else in the whole world whatever thou wouldst know concerning Greece, and who might serve thee right well as guide. I mean him who performed the cure on thy foot. Dear lady, Darius answered, since it's thy wish that we try first the valour of the Greeks, it were best, methinks, before marching against them, to send some Persians to spy out the land. They may go in company with the man thou mentionest, and when they have seen and learnt all, they can bring us back a full report. Then, having a more perfect knowledge of them, I will begin the war. Darius, having so spoke, put no long distance between the word and the deed, but as soon as day broke, he summoned to his presence 15 Persians of note, and bade them take Democedes for their guide, and explore the sea-coasts of Greece. Above all, they were to be sure to bring Democedes back with them, and not suffer him to run away and escape. After he had given these orders, Darius sent for Democedes, and besought him to serve as guide to the Persians, and when he had shown them the whole of Greece, to come back to Persia. He should take, he said, all the valuables he possessed as presents to his father and his brothers, and he should receive on his return a far more abundant store. Moreover, the king added, he would give him as his contribution towards the presents a merchant ship, laden with all manner of precious things, which should accompany him on his voyage. Now, I don't believe that Darius, when he made these promises, had any guile in his heart. Democedes, however, who suspected that the king spoke to try him, took care not to snatch at the offers with any haste, but said he would leave his own goods behind to enjoy upon his return. The merchant ship which the king proposed to grant him to carry gifts to his brothers, that he would accept at the king's hands. So when Darius had laid his orders upon Democedes, he sent him and the Persians away to the coast. The men went down to Phoenicia, to Sidon, the Phoenician town, where straightway they fitted out 2 triremes and a trading vessel, which they loaded with all manner of precious merchandise. And everything being now ready, they set sail for Greece. When they had made the land, they kept along the shore and examined it, taking notes of all that they saw, and in this way they explored the greater portion of the country and all the most famous regions, until at last they reached Tarentum in Italy. There Aristophilides, king of the Tarentines, out of kindness to Democedes, took the rudders off the Median ships and detained their crews as spies. Meanwhile Democedes escaped to Crotona, his native city, whereupon Aristophilides released the Persians from prison and gave their rudders back to them. The Persians now quitted Tarentum and sailed to Crotona in pursuit of Democedes. They found him in the marketplace, where they straightway laid violent hands on him. Some of the Crotonians, who greatly feared the power of the Persians, were willing to give him up, but others resisted, held Democedes fast, and even struck the Persians with their walking sticks. They, on their part, kept crying out, "Men of Crotona, beware what you do. It's the king's runaway slave that you're rescuing. Think you Darius will tamely submit to such an insult? Think you that if you carry off the man from us, it will hereafter go well with you? Will you not rather be the first persons on whom we shall make war? Will not your city be the first we shall seek to lead away captive?" Thus they spake, but the Crotonians didn't heed them. They rescued Democedes, and seized also the trading ship which the Persians had brought with him from Phoenicia. Thus, robbed and bereft of their guide, the Persians gave up all hope of exploring the rest of Greece and set sail for Asia. As they were departing, Democedes sent to them and begged they would inform Darius that the daughter of Milo was affianced to him as his bride, for the name of Milo, the wrestler, was in high repute with the king. My belief is that Democedes hastened his marriage by the payment of a large sum of money for the purpose of showing Darius that he was a man of mark in his own country. The Persians weighed anchor and left Crotona, but being wrecked on the coast of Iapygia, were made slaves by the inhabitants. From this condition they were rescued by Gillas, a banished Tarentine, who ransomed them at his own cost, and took them back to Darius. Darius offered to repay this service by granting Gillas whatever boon he chose to ask, whereupon Gillas told the king of his misfortune, and begged to be restored to his country. Fearing, however, that he might bring trouble on Greece if a vast armament was sent to Italy on his account, he added that it would content him if the Cnidians undertook to obtain his recall. Now the Cnidians were close friends of the Tarentines, which made him think there was no likelier means of procuring his return. Darius promised and performed his part, for he sent a messenger to Cnidus and commanded the Cnidians to restore Gillas. The Cnidians did as he wished, but found themselves unable to persuade the Tarentines, and were too weak to attempt force. Such then was the course which this matter took. These were the first Persians who ever came from Asia to Greece, and they were sent to spy out the land for the reason which I have before mentioned. After this, King Darius besieged and took Samos, which was the first city, Greek or barbarian, that he conquered. The cause of his making war upon Samos was the following. At the time when Cambyses, son of Cyrus, marched against Egypt, vast numbers of Greeks flocked thither, some, as might have been looked for, to push their trade, others to serve in his army, others again merely to see the land. Among these last was Seleucus, son of Iaches, and brother of Polycrates, at that time an exile from Samos. This Seleucus, during his stay in Egypt, met with a singular piece of good fortune. He happened one day to put on a scarlet cloak, and thus attired to go into the marketplace at Memphis, when Darius, who was one of Cambyses's bodyguard, and not at that time a man of any account, saw him, and taking a strong liking to the dress, went up and offered to purchase it. Seleucus perceived how anxious he was, and by a lucky inspiration answered, "There is no price at which I would sell my cloak, but I'll give it thee for nothing, if it must needs be thine." Darius thanked him and accepted the garment. Poor Seleucin felt at the time that he had fooled away his cloak in a very simple manner, but afterwards, when in the course of years Cambyses died, and the 7 Persians rose in revolt against the Magus, and Darius was the man chosen out of the 7 to have the kingdom, Seleucin learnt that the person to whom the crown had come was the very man who had coveted his cloak in Egypt, and to whom he had freely given it. So he made his way to Susa, and seating himself at the portal of the royal palace, gave out that he was a benefactor of the king. Then the doorkeeper went and told Darius. Amazed at what he heard, the king said thus within himself, "What Greek can have been my benefactor, or to which of them do I owe anything so lately as I have got the kingdom? Scarcely a man of them all has been here, not more than 1 or 2 certainly since I came to the throne, nor can I remember that I am in the debt of any Greek. However, bring him in and let me hear what he means by his boast." So the doorkeeper ushered Seleucin into the presence, and the interpreters asked him who he was, and what he'd done that he should call himself a benefactor of the king. Then Seleucin told the whole story of the cloak, and said that it was he who had made Darius the present. Hereupon Darius exclaimed, "O thou most generous of men, art thou indeed he who, when I had no power at all, gavest me something, albeit little? Truly the favour is as great as a very grand present would be nowadays. I'll therefore give thee in return gold and silver without stint, that thou mayst never repent of having rendered a service to Darius, son of Hystaspes." "Give me not, O king," replied Seleucin, "either silver or gold, but recover me Samos, my native land, and let that be thy gift to me. It belongs now to a slave of ours, who, when Herodotus put my brother Polycrates to death, became its master. Give me Samos, I beg, but give it unharmed, with no bloodshed, no leading into captivity." When he heard this, Darius sent off an army under Otanes, one of the 7, with orders to accomplish all that Seleucin had desired. And Otanes went down to the coast and made ready to cross over. The government of Samos was held at this time by Maiandrius, son of Maiandrius, whom Polycrates had appointed as his deputy. This person conceived the wish to act like the justest of men, but it was not allowed him to do so. On receiving tidings of the death of Polycrates, he forthwith raised an altar to Jove, the protector of freedom, and assigned it the piece of ground which may still be seen in the suburb. This done, he assembled all the citizens and spoke to them as follows. "You know, friends, that the sceptre of Polycrates and all his power has passed into my hands, and if I choose I may rule over you. But what I condemn in another I will, if I may, avoid myself. I never approved the ambition of Polycrates to lord it over men as good as himself, nor looked with favour on any of those who have done the like. Now therefore, since he has fulfilled his destiny, I lay down my office and proclaim equal rights. All that I claim in return is 6 talents from the treasures of Polycrates, and the priesthood of Jove, the protector of freedom, for myself and my descendants forever. Allow me this as the man by whom his temple has been built, and by whom ye yourselves are now restored to liberty." As soon as Maiandrius had ended, one of the Samians rose up and said, "As if thou wert fit to rule us, base-born and rascal as thou art, think rather of accounting for the moneys which thou hast fingered." The man who thus spoke was a certain Telesarchus, one of the leading citizens. Maiandrius, therefore, feeling sure that if he laid down the sovereign power, someone else would become tyrant in his room, gave up the thought of relinquishing it. Withdrawing to the citadel, he sent for the chief men, one by one, under pretence of showing them his accounts, and as fast as they came, arrested them and put them in irons. So these men were bound, and Maiandrius, within a short time, fell sick. Whereupon Lycoritus, one of his brothers, thinking that he was going to die, and wishing to make his own accession to the throne the easier, slew all the prisoners. It seemed that the Samians didn't choose to be a free people. When the Persians, whose business it was to restore Seleucin, reached Samos, not a man was found to lift up his head against them. Maiandrius and his partisans expressed themselves willing to quit the island upon certain terms, and these terms were agreed to by Otanes. After the treaty was made, the most distinguished of the Persians had their thrones brought, and seated themselves over against the citadel. Now the king Maiandrius had a light-headed brother, Cadileus by name, whom for some offence or other he had shut up in prison. This man heard what was going on, and peering through his bars, saw the Persians sitting peacefully upon their seats. Whereupon he exclaimed aloud, and said he must speak with Maiandrius. When this was reported to him, Maiandrius gave orders that Cadileus should be released from prison, and brought into his presence. No sooner did he arrive than he began reviling and abusing his brother, and strove to persuade him to attack the Persians. "Thou meanest-spirited of men," he said, "thou canst keep me, thy brother, chained in a dungeon, notwithstanding that I've done nothing worthy of bonds. But when the Persians come and drive thee forth a houseless wanderer from thy native land, thou lookest on, and hast not the heart to seek revenge, though they might so easily be subdued. If thou, however, art afraid, lend me thy soldiers, and I will make them pay dearly for thy coming here. I engage the two to send thee first safe out of the island." So spake Cadileus, and Maiandrius gave consent. Not, I believe, that he was so void of sense as to imagine that his own forces could overcome those of the king, but because he was jealous of Seleucin, and didn't wish him to get so quietly an unharmed city. He desired, therefore, to rouse the anger of the Persians against Samos, that so he might deliver it up to Seleucin with its power at the lowest possible ebb, for he knew well that if the Persians met with a disaster, they would be furious against the Samians, while he himself felt secure of a retreat at any time that he liked, since he had a secret passage underground, leading from the citadel to the sea. Maiandrius accordingly took ship and sailed away from Samos, and Cadileus, having armed all the mercenaries, threw open the gates and fell upon the Persians, who looked for nothing less, since they supposed that the whole matter had been arranged by treaty. At the first onslaught, therefore, all the Persians of most note, men who were in the habit of using litters, were slain by the mercenaries. The rest of the army, however, came to the rescue, defeated the mercenaries, and drove them back into the citadel. Then Otanes, the general, when he saw the great calamity which had befallen the Persians, made up his mind to forget the orders which Darius had given him, not to kill or enslave a single Samian, but to deliver up the island unharmed to Seleucin, and gave the word to his army that they should slay the Samians, both men and boys, wherever they could find them. Upon this, some of his troops laid siege to the citadel, while others began the massacre, killing all they met, some outside, some inside the temples. Maiandrius fled from Samos to Lacedaemon, and conveyed thither all the riches which he had brought away from the island, after which he acted as follows. Having placed upon his board all the gold and silver vessels that he had, and bade his servants employ themselves in cleaning them, he himself went and entered into conversation with Cleomenes, son of Anaxandridas, king of Sparta, and as they talked, brought him along to his house. There Cleomenes, seeing the plate, was filled with wonder and astonishment, whereon the other begged that he would carry home with him any of the vessels that he liked. Maiandrius said this 2 or 3 times, but Cleomenes here displayed surpassing honesty. He refused the gift, and thinking that if Maiandrius made the same offers to others, he would get the aid he sought, the Spartan king went straight to the ephors and told them it would be best for Sparta that the Samian stranger should be sent away from the Peloponnese, for otherwise he might perchance persuade himself or some other Spartan to be base. The ephors took his advice, and let Maiandrius know by a herald that he must leave the city. Meanwhile the Persians netted Samos, and delivered it up to Seleucin, stripped of all its men. After some time, however, this same General Otanes was induced to repeople it by a dream which he had, and a loathsome disease that seized on him. After the armament of Otanes had set sail for Samos, the Babylonians revolted, having made every preparation for defence. During all the time that the Magus was king, and while the seven were conspiring, they had profited by the troubles, and had made themselves ready against a siege. And it happened somehow or other that no one perceived what they were doing. At last, when the time came for rebelling openly, they did as follows. Having first set apart their mothers, each man chose besides out of his whole household one woman, whomsoever he pleased. These alone were allowed to live, while all the rest were brought to one place and strangled. The women chosen were kept to make bread for the men, while the others were strangled that they might not consume the stores. When tidings reached Darius of what had happened, he drew together all his power, and began the war by marching straight upon Babylon and laying siege to the place. The Babylonians, however, cared not a whit for his siege. Mounting upon the battlements that crowned their walls, they insulted and jeered at Darius and his mighty host. One even shouted to them and said, "Why sit ye there, Persians? Why do ye not go back to your homes? Till mules foal, ye will not take our city." This was said by a Babylonian who thought that a mule would never foal. Now when 1 year and 7 months had passed, Darius and his army were quite wearied out, finding that they couldn't anyhow take the city. All stratagems and all arts had been used, and yet the king could not prevail, not even when he tried the means by which Cyrus made himself master of the place. The Babylonians were ever upon the watch, and he found no way of conquering them. At last, in the 20th month, a marvellous thing happened to Zopyrus, son of the Megabyzus, who was among the 7 men that overthrew the Magus. One of his sumpter mules gave birth to a foal. Zopyrus, when they told him, not thinking that it could be true, went and saw the colt with his own eyes, after which he commanded his servants to tell no one what had come to pass, while he himself pondered the matter. Calling to mind then the words of the Babylonian at the beginning of the siege, "Till mules foal, ye shall not take our city," he thought, as he reflected on this speech, that Babylon might now be taken, for it seemed to him that there was a divine providence in the man having used the phrase, and then his mule having foaled. As soon, therefore, as he felt within himself that Babylon was fated to be taken, he went to Darius and asked him if he set a very high value on its conquest. When he found that Darius did indeed value it highly, he considered further with himself how he might make the deed his own, and be the man to take Babylon. Noble exploits in Persia are ever highly honoured, and bring their authors to greatness. He therefore reviewed all ways of bringing the city under, but found none by which he could hope to prevail, unless he maimed himself, and then went over to the enemy. To do this, seeming to him a light matter, he mutilated himself in a way that was utterly without remedy, for he cut off his own nose and ears, and then, clipping his hair close and flogging himself with a scourge, he came in his plight before Darius. Wrath stirred within the king at the sight of a man of his lofty rank in such a condition. Leaping down from his throne, he exclaimed aloud, and asked Zopyrus who it was that had disfigured him, and what he had done to be so treated. Zopyrus answered, "There is not a man in the world but thou, O king, that could reduce me to such a plight. No stranger's hands have wrought this work on me but my own only. I maimed myself because I couldn't endure that the Assyrians should laugh at the Persians." "Wretched man," said Darius, "thou coverest the foulest deed with the fairest possible name when thou sayest thy maiming is to help our siege forward. How will thy disfigurement, thou simpleton, induce the enemy to yield one day the sooner? Surely thou hast gone out of thy mind when thou didst so misuse thyself." Had I told thee, rejoined the other, what I was bent on doing, thou wouldst not have suffered it. As it is, I kept my own counsel, and so accomplished my plans. Now, therefore, if there be no failure on thy part, we shall take Babylon. I will desert to the enemy as I am, and when I get into their city I will tell them that it is by thee I have been thus treated. I think they will believe my words, and entrust me with a command of troops. Thou, on thy part, must wait till the 10th day after I am entered into the town, and then place near to the gates of Semiramis a detachment of thy army, troops for whose loss thou wilt care little, 1,000 men. Wait after that 7 days, and post me another detachment, 2,000 strong, at the Nineveh gates. Then let 20 days pass, and at the end of that time station near the Chaldean gates a body of 4,000. Let neither these nor the former troops be armed with any weapons but their swords. Those thou mayst leave them. After the 20 days are over, bid thy whole army attack the city on every side, and put me 2 bodies of Persians, one at the Belian, the other at the Kissian gates. For I expect that, on account of my successes, the Babylonians will entrust everything, even the keys of their gates, to me. Then it will be for me and my Persians to do the rest. Having left these instructions, Zopyrus fled towards the gates of the town, often looking back, to give himself the air of a deserter. The men upon the towers, whose business it was to keep a lookout, observing him, hastened down, and setting one of the gates slightly ajar, questioned him who he was, and on what errand he had come. He replied that he was Zopyrus, and had deserted to them from the Persians. Then the doorkeepers, when they heard this, carried him at once before the magistrates. Introduced into the assembly, he began to bewail his misfortunes, telling them that Darius had maltreated him in the way they could see, only because he had given advice that the siege should be raised, since there seemed no hope of taking the city. And now, he went on to say, my coming to you, Babylonians, will prove the greatest gain that you could possibly receive, while to Darius and the Persians it will be the severest loss. Verily, he by whom I have been so mutilated shall not escape unpunished, and truly all the paths of his counsels are known to me. Thus did Zopyrus speak. The Babylonians, seeing a Persian of such exalted rank in so grievous a plight, his nose and ears cut off, his body red with marks of scourging and with blood, had no suspicion but that he spoke the truth, and was really come to be their friend and helper. They were ready, therefore, to grant him anything that he asked, and on his suing for a command, they entrusted to him a body of troops, with the help of which he proceeded to do as he had arranged with Darius. On the 10th day after his flight, he led out his detachment, and surrounding the 1,000 men whom Darius, according to agreement, had sent first, he fell upon them and slew them all. Then the Babylonians, seeing that his deeds were as brave as his words, were beyond measure pleased, and set no bounds to their trust. He waited, however, and when the next period agreed on had elapsed, again with a band of picked men he sallied forth and slaughtered the 2,000. After this second exploit, his praise was in all mouths. Once more, however, he waited till the interval appointed had gone by, and then led the troops to the place where the 4,000 were. He put them also to the sword. This last victory gave the finishing stroke to his power, and made him all in all with the Babylonians. Accordingly, they committed to him the command of their whole army, and put the keys of their city into his hands. Darius now, still keeping to the plan agreed upon, attacked the walls on every side, whereupon Zopyrus played out the remainder of his stratagem. While the Babylonians, crowding to the walls, did their best to resist the Persian assault, he threw open the Kissian and the Belian gates and admitted the enemy. Such of the Babylonians as witnessed the treachery took refuge in the temple of Bel. The rest, who didn't see it, kept at their posts till at last they too learnt that they were betrayed. Thus was Babylon taken for the second time. Darius, having become master of the place, destroyed the wall and tore down all the gates. For Cyrus had done neither the one nor the other when he took Babylon. He then chose out near 3,000 of the leading citizens and caused them to be crucified, while he allowed the remainder still to inhabit the city. Further, wishing to prevent the race of the Babylonians from becoming extinct, he provided wives for them in the room of those whom, as I explained before, they strangled to save their stores. These he levied from the nations bordering on Babylonia, who were each required to send so large a number to Babylon that in all there were collected no fewer than 50,000. It's from these women that the Babylonians of our times are sprung. As for Zopyrus, he was considered by Darius to have surpassed in the greatness of his achievements all other Persians, whether of former or of later times, except only Cyrus, with whom no Persian ever yet thought himself worthy to compare. Darius, as the story goes, would often say that he had rather Zopyrus were unmaimed than be master of 20 more Babylons. And he honoured Zopyrus greatly. Year by year he presented him with all the gifts which are held in most esteem among the Persians. He gave him likewise the government of Babylon for his life, free from tribute, and he also granted him many other favours. Megabyzus, who held the command in Egypt against the Athenians and their allies, was a son of this Zopyrus, and Zopyrus, who fled from Persia to Athens, was a son of this Megabyzus.